So now you can start, Tobias.
Hello, everyone, to the FRIBIS Annual Conference 2021. That is the parallel session, Basic Income for Peacebuilding. And today it's my honor to introduce Selvi Sachithanandam. She is the founder of the Basic Income Sri Lanka, the CEO of the Pullman Foundation, and the vice president of the Girls Guide. And warmly welcome. Then we have Patrick Brown. He's a member and I believe founder of the UBI Lab. So give me 1 second, please. I have to. Sorry for that. Sorry for that. So Patrick Brown, he is member and I believe founder of the UBI Lab, and he wrote his PhD on UBI as a peace dividend. And welcome, Patrick. And then we have Marcel Franke, his PhD candidate economics at the University of Freiburg, and he writes about constitutional and conflict economics, and myself. And now let us start with my agenda today. And first I will introduce the topic. We have, I will give you an introduction to my agenda, and in my introduction, I will give you the connection between this two topics and the peace building team. And the question is, so I will talk about the effects of a basic income on collective wage bargaining, and Marcel Franke will talk about can inequalities and status quo justify transfers. And now you ask yourself maybe what had to do with peace, and I will tell you. With bargaining situation is a situation in which two or more persons have a common interest to cooperate, but have conflict interests over how exactly to cooperate. And the button, you can see a picture from Chile, 2020. And you can see that a lot in Chile, there were civilians, they want a new constitution. And that's exactly is the topic of Marcel Franke. And on the right, you can see a picture from an old picture, but a picture from on a strike. So, and but no, the strike or the class struggle between workers and employers are not a thing of the past. Even if they're often not longer bloody, they always show conflict, potential conflict in the society. And you can also think the inequality debate and the wage share debate, they also have a place for bargaining issues. And that's why I ask myself how a basic income changed the bargaining situation. And to do so, I have to introduce the game theory. A game theory is always an analysis of strategic decision making. And a bargaining situation is per se a game situation. So we have both players act differently, and they can act against and with together. So, but they have to, both players have their own agenda. And that's different from the microeconomic approach. We optimize problems against the nature. But here we have both players and both are important. We can game theory split into subcategories, cooperative and non-cooperative. And the cooperative approach first specified axioms. So that's assumptions they are per definition are true. And then they characterize a solution. But they abstract for information and strategies and move of the player. So for my agenda, it's not important or not so helpful. I want to I want to know how the players move, right? And so non-cooperative game models are very essential for my topic. This is work in progress. So sadly, I cannot show you results, but I can show a little bit of my research. And the effects of a basic income on collective wage bargaining is my research question. We have a very old argument, and Dunlap suggests that an external K rate, you can think unemployment rate or basic income, has an influence on the wage structure of a firm. But the question is basic income a K rate, so to speak? And there are two compete perspectives. And one of them I call positive perspective from a worker view, and one of them are negative perspective. And I start with the positive one. So the exit option, so-called exit option, is highly connected with Carl Wiederquist. That's the idea that you can leave the labor market. You can say, no, I don't want to work for this condition or under this condition, and I will go. So that's the exit option, and you can split them in a strategic exit. That is a threat, so you can use it as a threat against your employer, and then he will raise your wages, but you don't leave. It's only a threat. And then a passive effect, that's you leave and the labor markets get tightened, and as a reaction the wage increase. But on both A and B have a positive effect, the wages will increase. The negative one is connected with the idea that a basic income is a massive wage subsidy, and encourage employers to pay even lower wages. So you make a deal with your company. They give you the half give you the state, and then everything is fine. But on the you have no effect on the bargaining power, or you have weakening effect on the bargaining power. So two different views, but what tells us the economic theory about the impact? And for that, we have to think about trade union, or first we have to get a clear idea what we mean if you talk about bargaining or collective bargaining. Collective bargaining means simply any negotiation between one and more employers and with one or more workers. And important, we only debate I only research such bargaining about wages and employment. That's simplification, because in real life they talk about more stuff. That's connected with an old debate. I want to skip this point, but this is a very old debate, and economic theory has a hard time to modeling economic behavior, union behavior. But I want to skip this. And now I screen the models that exist. And the green one, they are optimization models, so microeconomic models. And the first one and the second one are very close connected, and they are not really interesting for me because they are oversimplification. They, for example, they have bargaining power. The union can set the wage. They get every wage they want. That's not realistic. That's not very helpful. But the efficient bargaining model is a good one. So actually the union and firm determine wage and employment, and the result is efficiency. So we get the Pareto optima. That's for economic very well, also very good. And we have also something like an exit invoice, and think that's what I research. I search something like an exit invoice strategy or behavior. Also, we have the conflict dimension, but only if we skip some assumptions. So we need asymmetric information, and then we can get a conflict or strikes, and then it's not perfect because not in the modeling in the original model, but is very helpful. The problem is we have no bargaining process. We have no idea what's happened in the bargaining itself. And that's why we need the Rubinstein model. In the Rubinstein model, you will see immediately they make bargaining about the cake, about the pie. And the problem, we have no bargaining power. Not really. We have no exit and voice, and we have no conflict, but we have this process. So that's a trade-off, right? That's not optimal. But let us look at the model. First, we look at the efficient bargaining, and we can see the profit function. So we have one firm and one union, and the profit function is the price times the product function minus the wage and the employment worker. And the result is the profit, right? And the union utility function is the utility and on wages plus the M is the union membership minus the employed workers. So that's the unemployment. The brackets are the unemployment. And UB is very important because U is the utility about the reserve wage or the unemployment rate or the basic income, right? So, and if you use this two, profit and the utility function, you get the graphs on the right side. And important is now the contract curve. Every point on the contract curve, this the C curve, are efficient. And if you rise B, so if you rise the basic income, what's happened? Now you can see C move left, right, to the up, move up, so to the left. And this means the wage rise. And this is exactly what we talk about in the slide before, right? This is the exit option. And we can see this, we can see we have a positive reaction of wages, a wage increase. The problem is we don't know why, what's happened. We don't know the bargaining process. This is simply not enough. To get the bargaining process, I have to show you the Rubinstein model. And the Rubinstein model is also very simple. We have one agent. He make an offer, and then the second agent can react or accept. If he react, he make the counter offer. Both players prefer more than less, and they don't like delay. Any delay harms both equally. That's very important. We call this the same time discounting. And the result of this game is a little bit surprising because the game ends immediately. They don't negotiation, they don't bargaining, they have not, they stop immediately. And the formula is not very important here, but from my perspective, it's not very helpful because I'm interested in bargaining, and that's not really bargaining, right? The problem is they have the same time discount. If they have not the same time discount, we have room for later agreements. We get multi-equilibria, so we call it. And the question is now, how does basic income, what is the effect of basic income on this time preferences? And so my next step in my research is I have to make a clear distinction between collective and individual bargaining, because we can see that this time discounting in the individual level have to do with psychology, but in the union level, they have to do with different stuff, right? but not with psychology. So I have to split. I make clear if I have to be clear if I'm interested in collective or individual, but both this don't work together. It's not good enough. And second, I have to work on the exit strategy. So that's the only thing that I'm interested in. As I start, I don't know about exit strategies, but now, so the first positive result, I only look about exit strategies, and then I need to set up the Rubinstein model with exit voice option in a bargaining process with conflict. So this was my part, and now I will give Marcel Franke the speak.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation and invitation to this panel. Tobias, do you hear and see me and the screen share? Is everything set up? Okay, very well. So I'm continuing. Well, let's start with the first slide. I'm continuing the work together of Tobias and me. We worked together and we will present our work in progress together. So I'm here to present my part of our common start with the bargaining theory and UBI, and will tell you my idea that I'm working on currently. So to see the structure, once again, we are now in the question, can equalities in the status quo justify transfer? And I will present you shortly the motivation, the start of the idea. Then I will build this idea into the Nash bargaining model, which is the following 3 points: setting, Nash rule, and model. And then I'll shortly tell you my further questions that I have and that I will work on. And if you have any idea or intuition already, feel free to give me feedback. Yeah, okay, let's continue. I want to start with a media core length quote from Buchanan. For those of you who don't know Buchanan, he's a prominent author on the field of contractarian economics. And this quote here says something about how the normative value of social contracts can be somewhat intuitively perceived. So individuals are conceived as entering into discussion and ultimately reaching some initial agreement that both assigns separate individual rights and establishes an authority charged with the protection and enforcement of these rights. Contractual agreement among a subset of persons with terms to be imposed on others would negate the legitimacy of the whole construction. As you see, we have some worth of an agreement, and if this agreement is forced on some individuals, then it loses its worth in this aspect. So my starting thoughts are, if one is enslaved, for example, by others, this is a common example in those settings because it's the extreme. That someone is enslaved, it has no power in comparison to the other, and therefore is illustrative for power differences in such bargaining situations. And then a contract between those two may be imposed if the slaveholder in the situation is imposing its rules then on the enslaved individual. And if legitimacy is important, as Buchanan mentions here somehow indirectly, as the imposing would be a problem since legitimacy then fails or falls away, then legitimacy is may be important. And if you treat this by economic perspective, you take on methodology as individuals, being the actor and the source of value, so motivation for actions, then legitimacy is important, and therefore we would model them as economists as taking care about legitimacy in some way. Thus, they could have some incentives to generate value out of generated voluntary contracts. So they would take care about a contract having a higher value if they voluntarily agreed on those, or as I will try to integrate it into the model, a contract that has a higher, a better suited bargaining situation, so a situation where the wills are more equal, would have a higher value because the bargaining situation was more equal, and therefore the individuals had less power that they could use to bargain for their solution. And my question therefore then continues, if we model these incentives, may we find a reason for Pareto optimal transfer? Such an Pareto optimal transfer, you could call it then a UBI or something like that, that is incorporated into a social contract due to the reason or the final end to have a fair starting point for bargaining over a social contract. So as a first step before you actually enter the social contract or even as a solution. So let's build the setting so you will understand those thoughts a little bit more. We make it very simple. We have a two-person model. We call those individuals I and J on the following graphs on this slide. And on the next slide, they will be called A and B or 1 and 2. In the formula, I call them I and J. This is due to different sources, but everyone knows what's meant by two individuals and however they are called. They bargain over a first social contract, and currently they don't have a social contract. They live in anarchy, so they have no rules to follow. There's no just, there's no law, there's no unjust or unjust, so no law at all, no right, no wrong, only their value that they bring with them. And therefore they end up in a conflict equilibrium or energy, however you want to call it, and you may give this a name as A, so you can put it into formula. This yields then our reference utility for the bargaining situation. So if they fail to bargain successfully over a social contract, they will end up in anarchy and they will gain a utility level of D. I called it here DI, which is depending on A. AI for the position of the individuum I in energy, and vice versa for J. For simplicity, if I model further, I may use this, so therefore I let it in there. Let's assume DI equaling AJ. And DI equaling AI and DJ equaling AJ. So therefore, we have them equally and can substitute them. In the following, I will just use D as the variable here for the reference utility and not A. But if I build a model further, then I may use their differences. Yeah, in the slide here, we have also the graph by Buchanan that sends us a picture in the utility plane. You have here two utilities of the two individuals, A and B. Whoever is on which axis doesn't really matter so much. What matters is that in point D, we're in the energy, which is more or less west life. So it's hard and rough. You have low utility levels, and therefore this point is close to the origin. If you now manage to make a social contract that benefits both individuals, therefore they both agree to make a social contract, then you may end up in C. That's also the argument of Buchanan, who is a social contractarian. And Buchanan then argues further, if they have some social contract, they may implement all these structures, such as trade, markets taking place, then we may move forward to E or something like that. But I'm just looking at the step from D to C currently. Okay. This was the reference point with energy. Now we continue to the setting, the utility side, so our points C, the social contract. It is about utilities of the bargaining results, so the individuals have to have an idea what a social contract will yield them. Therefore, we need to organize the social contract proposals in a way that we can work in the model with it. You can imagine everything for a social contract. Yeah? Whatever you prefer, you can write in there. And whether or not you can apply it then and enforce it with some governmental structure is another question, but in theory, everything is possible there. We make it very simple here to put it into the model and start modeling such that we organize them in a way that they are just denoted by some parameter S, which is 0 for the best contract for I, and which is 1 for the best contract for J, and in between the values for the contracts in between. Therefore, we need to go away from the set of possible social contracts that you have on the right side in the graph here. So you see here the utilities and possible social contracts proposals, as well as our point D here for the reference utility. Now assume there are a lot of social contract proposals. Every individual knows their utility from the social contract. And then we know where in this plane the different proposals lie. If we analyze them now on the criterion of Pareto efficiency or Pareto superiority at first, then we can look at points that are better than, for example, the reference utility and as well as their alternative offers. So those two steps, or more or less the latter step as first, yields us the line of Pareto efficient social contract approaches, which goes from P1 over P2 to P3. This line, the thick line there, is the boundary of or set of possible offers that yields a higher utility than their comparisons within the set or the other things on the line of the set that yield lower utility for one individual without giving another more, which is the Pareto criterion. So those are the Pareto superior points to the others, so they are Pareto efficient. You could go a step further and say we look only on the at those social contract proposals that yield a higher utility for both individuals than their reference utility. Then you would have to go from the points where the straight lines from D hit on the surface of our set of possible contract proposals. So I'll show you with my mouse here and here. This here would be then the area that is Pareto efficient as well as Pareto superior, Pareto better than point D, which is our reference utility. However, we organize them the way that the best feasible social contract is denoted by I. For I is denoted by S equaling 1. So we would give P3 here S equaling 1, and then we go up here, S becoming larger, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, until S becomes 1, and then it ends up in the worst of social contract for I, that is Pareto efficient, and the best of for individuum 2, so individuum J here. This way we can very simply model it and therefore define the utilities below here. For risk neutral individuals, we keep it simple as for I, 1 minus S, and for J as S. So it's a zero-sum game. Whatever the one person wins, the other loses, and vice versa. Okay, so Nash, the Nash rule, which I apply, is a solution that Nash provides us, which is that maximizes the product of the agent's gains from disagreement. So it's a process of bargaining solutions that rational agents that are well-known and well-educated in bargaining theory take as their reference value according to Nash, because this is the reasonable solution for both of them. They know that this is, if the other individual is also informed and rational, what the other individual will admit to, and therefore expects this also to be its self-ideal solution. And since it's a Nash solution, it will obviously be the best choice for both individuals in case they can implement it. Technically, this means the product of the gains of both individuals from the bargaining solution is maximized, which is if you draw or you assume a welfare function out of the product of the individual utilities, then you would have, if you keep this utility in sum, the product of the utilities, so the welfare fixed, would yield you iso-welfare curves, of which we have one here, the N curve here in this graph, which is a convex due to its characteristic of being a product of the two, the utility of the one and the other one. So since this is supposed to maximize our solution or utility, the iso-welfare curve must be tangential to the set of possibilities. Obviously, it will be somewhere in the middle since it's convex here. That's the beauty of the product of the utilities to generate a welfare. And in some point that is tangential, you will have a maximum possible welfare as the Nash bargaining solution uses to construct itself, and therefore we would generate our solution there. Another point I want to mention is that there is no monetary compensation possible to generate this Nash solution here. We have this in the right graph. Here you have the same situation. You find some Nash solution point here as the corresponding barter deal. And now you could assume, well, let's maximize the utility further by stepping here to the solution upwards along a budget line that has a step of 1. So the one individual compensates with money, for example, the utility of the other, such that we get a more equal share of the utility for the other. So therefore, they would say from here, let's take this solution, which maximizes the pool of shareable utility, and then I compensate you for the loss that one individual takes because it's not a symmetric solution in terms of utility. Nevertheless, this is not possible because money is an issue that has to be set up first by law. and by a bank and the government, and therefore by social contract. So we are in anarchy, there's no money or trust in money, and therefore also no property rights. So even if you have money, it gets stolen away maybe. So it's not of a huge worth, and therefore we skip this element and stay with our solution here on the left. Okay, now to formula. This is the end of graphics for my presentation, so we stick to formulas now. And don't worry, they were easy as well. We have here the Nash rule in formula. It is that we take the argmax of S from this product here. This is basically a multiplication of the first factor being the utility function of one individual minus its reference utility, and this times the utility function of the other one minus its reference utility. Maximizing this, so taking the maximum argmax of S yields us, I used Wolfram alpha for this, the solution S equaling 0.5 times dj plus 1 minus di. So we see here that we get for equal reference utilities, put in whatever you want as long as it is equal, you will get 0.5 times 1, which is 0.5, which is exactly the middle solution in our plane of S equaling 0 and S equaling 1. And then when you have a difference in the reference utilities, basically bargaining power shifts, and you will get an asymmetric solution which prefers one individual or the other. Also, we see that to get an S between 0 and 1, which was assumed to be the ordering of our social contracts, so in our interpretation, only those have meaning. To stay in an inner solution, we need the quadratic sum of those to be smaller 1. If it becomes larger, then we'll have the problem of getting our corner solution, basically, because we cannot interpret negative values for S in this application of the model or higher values than 1. Okay, I'll hurry up. So the difference in reference utilities impacts the bargaining result. We saw this by analysis of this solution here, and therefore the design of energy matters. Imagine designing the energy now by redistribution or something like that. I just focus on the slide. Okay, thus we want to mention that the value of a contract may depend on the way it arose, and therefore let's shortly mention the example that I may be enslaved by J in anarchy situation because I is very weak and J is very strong. Then AI is smaller than AJ. Let us assume this example here being a little bit extreme. DI equaling 0, DJ equaling 1. This yields S equaling 1, which means J gets its optimal solution and I can't really bring in its arguments. It just accepts whatever J offers. And in comparison, if you take what we just had, the other example, you get 0.5. Now, how can we take care about this AI and AJ being very different? Well, we can implement something like a preference for equality in ANGI. And we defined it here over the square sum of the deviations in D and named it P. Then I put P in the utility functions and looked at the solution for this. Here you can see the Nash algorithm or formula to generate this result, and the solution, once again, used Wolfram alpha. It's not surprising, but interesting. You see that we have those factors just added here as a sum or as a with a minus in there. So we can easily conclude that for the same extent of this preference for equality, Pi equaling Pj, they cancel each other out, and therefore the impact on the solution is 0. That's where I am currently. So therefore, that's it. It's a first insightful result. And I want to further look at what the precise impact of a difference in those, so here being unequal, inequality of preferences for those is, and whether this may justify transfers at any point out of an individual rational calcul. Okay, thank you very much for your attention, and I'm interested in the further presentations of this panel and the conference. Thank you.
Oh, I think Patrick is the next. We have no questions. So actually, I feel yes. Patrick, please go forward.
Great, thank you very much, Tobias. Hello, everyone watching on YouTube. Let me just bring that up here. Great, so yeah, Tobias already introduced me at the start there. My name is Patrick Brown. I'm a PhD candidate at Queen's University in Belfast. I'm also a member of the Basic Income and Peacebuilding FRIBIS group, the founder of UBI Lab Northern Ireland, and also a councillor here in Newry Morning Down District Council in Northern Ireland. And my research at PhD level and also my work through the UBI Lab and the FRIBIS group focuses on whether a basic income could help with conflict transformation in Northern Ireland, and specifically looking at this idea of framing basic income as a peace dividend in post-conflict societies. So what is UBI as a peace dividend? We are proposing a trial of basic income in Northern Ireland that could serve as the first test of whether basic income will work as a peace dividend, to test its efficacy as that. The idea of using a basic income for conflict transformation in Northern Ireland comes out of the fact that conflict in Northern Ireland has been repressed or managed, that there's been a lid kept on it for a period of time, but under the surface there's still political, social, economic tensions bubbling away all the time that could risk further violence if society is not adequately transformed away from patterns of conflict. In particular, in Northern Ireland, if you look at the geographical areas, particularly in the big cities, there only is two big cities, Belfast and Derry. If you look at the areas in those urban areas in particular that had the largest numbers of people recruited into paramilitary organisations during the conflict in Northern Ireland, those are also the areas that pretty much line up perfectly, if you were to put two maps over each other, with the areas of highest deprivation today. So the idea, the thesis there being that there is a strong connection between economic deprivation, poverty and inequality, and the risk of involvement in conflict and paramilitarism. And here I've got some in the table on the right, got some examples there of some of the continuing what I call structural violence. It's the term from Galtung from the 70s or before. And you can see there some of the fairly shocking statistics, particularly in fairly developed Western nation like Ireland or the UK. And yeah, you can see particularly around mental health and suicide, drug and alcohol addiction, poverty rates and homelessness, and also an increase in paramilitary violence. There are still a number of areas of concern that are holding back transformation of communities in Northern Ireland. And from research on basic income trials worldwide, and also cash transfer programs, particularly in conflict zones, in post-conflict societies. My research suggests that there are 5 key areas in which a universal basic income could aid conflict transformation. Those are reducing crime and paramilitary influence, improving opportunities for young people, improving health and mental well-being, increasing trust and community relations, and building a stronger local economy. And what we want to do through testing a basic income in Northern Ireland is evaluate whether a universal basic income framed as a peace dividend can deliver on those 5 key areas. So how do we want to do this? Last year, the UBI Lab Northern Ireland proposed this working paper, which sets out in general how we would go about testing that. It proposes 2 different levels of basic income that we have we've roughly costed. a top-up payment of £200 to £400 a month, or a replacement of £700 to £900 a month, and those amounts would vary depending on age. The higher amount would integrate with the welfare system currently, so it would see the reduction of certain benefits like universal credit, which is the main employment benefit here. The top-up payment would be entirely unconditional on top of all other earned and unearned income. We've recommended a trial size of at least 1,000 people over a minimum of 2 years in order to really see some of the social changes coming about from the basic income intervention. And we have called for a saturation site as well as a demographically similar control group. We, in that document, proposed a number of quantitative and qualitative indicators to try and investigate those 5 key areas that I mentioned previously. And we have also called for a agent-based model experiment around before the trial. And this agent-based model would look in detail at the potential behavioural insights of a universal basic income within a post-conflict setting. ABMs have been used to look at basic income interventions in other places. We're working with a team of academics at the University of Torino in Italy to develop this. But this would be the first time the agent-based model, which is a computer simulation of basic income interventions, would be used in the post-conflict setting. So we have 4 key criteria for where we would want to test this intervention. So we want UBI recipients that live in an urban area. And this is because they will be closely clustered together, so we can more closely see the social outcomes of the basic income. We want an intervention area that is within the 10% most deprived wards, and that is to really give it the biggest bang for the buck, to be honest, in terms of lifting as many people as possible out of poverty. Third, the area should represent a diverse intersection of Northern Irish society. So that's as well as Catholic, Protestant, also minority populations as well. And finally, that it should be in an interface area. So this is an area that has traditionally been divided because of conflict or violence during the Troubles. So communities where Catholic and Protestant, mainly Catholic and Protestant communities live closely together, but are maybe divided often by a peace wall, a literal concrete wall between communities. There are still a scary amount of those in Belfast, unfortunately. So from that criteria, we identified an area in the Falls and Shankill Road in Belfast, and we're also developing a further trial location in Derry, Northern Ireland's second city. And following the publication of our proposal, this is really where we're starting to put into action the wheels to get this trial going. 6 of Northern Ireland's 11 local government areas have backed universal basic income, with 3 of them specifically calling for a trial in their area. So we are now working with those local government partners, as well as a few other key groups, to develop a feasibility study, which will then hopefully provide the foundation for a trial of the idea. And so we're doing that through a steering group. Actually, our next meeting is tomorrow, and we've recently secured most of our funding to deliver that feasibility study, which is very exciting. So next steps then, in terms of bringing this to fruition. So we're following closely the example of Scotland, which brought together the local government actors to secure funding from central government for their feasibility study. And we're hoping to publish our own study by sort of autumn or winter next year, and hope that this will provide a roadmap then for how that trial will be delivered in Northern Ireland at a devolved level. And this is quite an important point for anyone working around the political or institutional feasibility of basic income. There are a number of roadblocks potentially to doing a basic income trial within a devolved administration, because often welfare powers or certain fiscal powers rest with central government and aren't devolved to, for example, in this case, the Stormont Assembly, or it could be Holyrood in Scotland or the Senate in Wales. So colleagues in the UBI Lab network across the UK are currently investigating this issue, this challenge. around trying to either get permission from central government or trying to find ways to bypass central government to make payments, and then build that planning into the feasibility study. That feasibility study will include the behavioural findings of the agent-based model, as mentioned, but also some economic modelling on the costing of UBI, the impact it would have on poverty and inequality rates, and also some of the fiscal powers that could be used to fund a Northern Ireland-wide basic income outside of just the trial intervention. And we also hope to do a UBI calculator where people can go online and see how much better or worse off they would be as a result of the intervention, and also carry out some public opinion polling on the idea as well. We also have plans for a political pledge campaign heading into the Assembly election next year in order to get members of the Assembly who are hopefully then going to be elected and act as champions for the trial going forward. And put pressure on the Department of Communities here in Northern Ireland, who thus far, unlike our local councils, who have been very supportive, central government at Stormont, not at Westminster, have been fairly lukewarm on the idea of basic income. So we're hoping to apply some political pressure to change hearts and minds there. And then I've just on the right there finally got some of the advantages of doing a universal basic income trial in Northern Ireland. So we've got the unique peacebuilding angle, obviously. We actually do have devolution of welfare, so we can get around the problems that were raised in Scotland around the Department of Work and Pensions in London not giving permission. We do have permission to do it. Unfortunately, we don't have very many fiscal powers to do the basic income. We're also one of the poorest regions in Northern Europe, and also there's a lower cost of living, which would hopefully make it cheaper to do a trial as well. And some of the challenges I've already referenced, sustained political buy-in from all political parties here, particularly difficult in a divided post-conflict political system. Lack of institutional support from Department of Communities, who would ultimately, you would imagine, be responsible for running a trial. And also limited devolved fiscal powers to actually raise the finance to pay for a full basic income after the trial. So those are some of the challenges that we're hoping to address through the feasibility study as well. I think I've gone through that fairly quickly because I think we may have been running behind for time at one point. So I'm more than happy to take any questions that anyone has on that.
Yeah, one question from Diana about the agent-based simulation. Mm-hmm. It's entirely computer simulated, and what will be looking for?
So it's entirely computer simulated, and it runs. Now, I am not an expert in this field, so I'll try and do it in very non-technical language. But it is basically, it uses a program called Netlogo to feed in a range of real data, so data from like crime, mental health statistics in Northern Ireland, and then assumed outcomes as a result of the UBI intervention. So we would create agents, assign them different variables and fixed states, and then introduce the intervention, which would have an impact along a numerical scale that would change their behavior in a certain way. For example, you would assume that someone receiving the basic income based on data that has been gathered previously from the likes of Finland, Canada, Barcelona would improve mental health by X amount. So then you can spin that up across a large population of agents to try and get a macro level picture of what an improved mental health outcome might look like under the universal basic income. You can also then potentially translate that into public health savings as well. Hopefully that I still struggle to really sum it up myself, not knowing how the actual coding side of it works. But hopefully that gives some idea. You can also build in assumptions around if a young person in a deprived community is in receipt of the universal basic income, how much likely does that make them to stay in education until 18, or to not get engaged with their local paramilitary organisation, which very often happens in Northern Ireland. And we would use a mix of assumptions from basic income data that we know about already and data that we already have in Northern Ireland in terms of that, to try and come to a numerical value to decide on that.
Fine. So I think we have no other questions. So Selvi, please go forward.
Thank you very much, Tobias, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present at your annual conference. I'm Selvi Sachithanandam. I am the founder of the Basic Income Sri Lanka, and I'm also the CEO of Poornam Foundation, who's been working on transformation in communities. And I'm also a member of the Peacebuilding group at the FRIBIS University. And I'm very happy to present what we are doing, a small project in Sri Lanka. I hope I will be able to answer any question that you may have at the end. Now, Sri Lanka is a post-conflict country where the regional needs have been cast aside for the national political and economic priorities. The protracted conflict between the Tamil minorities and the Sinhala state lasted for 30 years. It culminated in a war that ended in 2009. The long years of conflict left deep scars on the people and the entire country, and had destroyed the social and economic infrastructure, more specifically in the areas where the war was fought, that is, in the region of north and east of Sri Lanka. Now, even after 12 years of war, after the war has ended, peacebuilding and reconciliation efforts by the government towards a lasting peace was not felt by the affected people. Any form of peace dividend for economic revival has been meager and inadequate for the Tamil communities in the region. It could be said that the guns were silenced, but peace was not won. According to the International Crisis Group of 2017, there are estimated 40,000 war widows in the northern province and 50,000 widows in the east. Now, these figures do not appear to include wives of those missing and disappeared. According to another estimate, there are 58,000 women-headed households in the north, accounting for a quarter of the population. This estimate does not include families of the missing persons. As of 2021, the missing persons are still missing, and women-headed households are still struggling to survive, and the militarization in the north and east has now spread to the whole country. Although basic income can be transformative in terms of livelihood recovery, empowerment, and social cohesion, the government does not see it as such. The government, the administrative apparatus, and the people themselves are lacking in the awareness of the basic income worldwide movement and the role basic income can play in transformation, economic recovery, and peace building. Hence, Basic Income Sri Lanka was formed in 2016 by three of us, like-minded women, to make the idea of an unconditional basic income a reality in the hearts and minds of the people first, and then within the structures of governance. The intentions in forming this group was fourfold. First, to raise awareness about UBI worldwide movement and to raise awareness of the concept of UBI and the importance of UBI in the post-conflict context. Second was to stimulate debate on the efficacy of this concept within UNDP, WFP, UNICEF, and the World Bank in Colombo. Thirdly, to demonstrate to the Sri Lankan government how it can be used as peace dividend and a tool for peace building and reconciliation. And finally, to inform and inspire the people and communities about the transformational nature of unconditional basic income. So we started a pilot project in 2017. It was a very small one, as the first wave to provide a springboard for an initial discussion. Sarath Davala was present at this launch to encourage and inspire basic income Sri Lanka. The pilot gave credence to the idea of universality along with unconditionality. Sinhala artists from the south, Tamil widows from the north, and Muslim widows from the east were selected as beneficiaries. All three communities have been chosen, maintaining a geographical balance as well. The beneficiaries were selected randomly by drawing lots. In a post-conflict scenario where such awards are subject to nepotism and corruption, and the transparency in the selection of beneficiaries created trust in the project for the community. Each award was 10,000 Sri Lankan rupees per month for a period of 2 years. It is roughly $63 per month. The calculation was based on the World Bank's definition of poverty threshold of $1.90 consumer expenditure per person per day at the time. Basic income team was supported by a few local private donors who were prepared to pledge for the individual recipients. A bank account was set up in the name of Basic Income Sri Lanka, and the donors paid funds to cover the full payment for the 24 months into the Bank of Ceylon, the BISL account for each of the recipient, and they had pledged support for. Poonam Foundation, a registered organization for carrying out projects on social transformation in Sri Lanka, maintained overview of the process and funded all the costs of implementation and overheads. This meant that the donors did not cover overheads and their funds went directly to the beneficiaries. This was very, very attractive to the donors. Basic Income Sri Lanka carried out workshops among the youth artists in Colombo and among the war widows in the north. At these workshops, artists from Stages Group of Sri Lanka and Mind Adventure Group of Sri Lanka brought out the plight of artists who make a valuable contribution to art and culture in Sri Lanka, but suffer from financial insecurities due to lack of sustainable income. Sinhala artists in the south had always showcased the post-conflict predicament of the country and the plight of the Tamil communities and other communities that were affected by the war. And they came in as partners for Basic Income Sri Lanka. The drama creations of the artists acknowledged the trauma of the people, laid bare the facts about the war, and was empathetic to the suffering of the Tamil Sinhala Muslim people. This approach by the Sinhala artist touched the hearts of the affected communities and had contributed to some extent to social cohesion and reconciliation between them. Unstable income patterns fill these artists' lives with worry and anxiety. Income is rarely stable, even at the best of economic climates. As the whole economy becomes unstable, for instance, during COVID-19 pandemic, the situation gets worse for the average artist who finds it hard to depend on art to survive. Now, workshops with the widows showed that the female-headed households have become numerous in the post-war Sri Lanka. One can query the numbers and locations of these families. The definition of female-headed households can also be disputed, but it is clear that the numbers of families with women being the main breadwinners are disproportionately high. The vulnerability of widows abandoned by females and abandoned females who have to care for young children is overwhelmingly challenging. In the Kilinochchi district, which was the area in which the conflict was intense, a target group was identified. It was also clear that despite some livelihood opportunities being implemented by various actors, the widows remained vulnerable and financially insecure. So we entered the first phase. We selected 3 widows and 2 artists, awarding a basic income of 10,000 rupees or euro 57 per month for a period of 2 years for each individual. Payments were made on a monthly basis by standing order payments through bank from an account set up by in the name of the Basic Income Sri Lanka. Basic income payments for these beneficiaries ceased on the 30th of June 2020. And while the first phase was in progress, monitoring of the payment mechanism and impact on the individual families and data collection methods were done by visits and personal interviews. The second phase was launched in August 2019. In this launch ceremony, the presence and contribution of Enno Schmidt of the Swiss Basic Income is remembered with gratitude by Basic Income Sri Lanka. A further 5 widows and 2 artists were chosen by raffle draw method for distribution for basic income. They are being paid the same amount, 10,000, for a period of two years, which has ended in September 2021. This launch was significant because it had higher numbers of attendees and a much wider coverage in the press and media. Basic Income Sri Lanka's idea of raising awareness was slowly becoming a reality. This time, we were able to fund 5 Tamil widows and 2 Sinhala artists for the further 2 years. It is superfluous to elucidate how these payments have been a godsend for these women and men, especially within the context of COVID, overlapping with the post-conflict deprivations. You are all too aware of the benefits of basic income. But one thing I would like to highlight is that how the women became empowered to help each other. They have even participated in economic activities which they would not have otherwise participated. In the meantime, we have had discussions with World Bank and UNDP on these subjects, which were encouraging but inconclusive. Our discussions with the government of Sri Lanka were not successful, I'm sorry to say. In fact, in some sense, we were even discouraged. We have now started our 3rd wave. In this, our objective is inspiring and raising awareness within the community became a reality. The community bought into the idea and took off on its own under the same guidelines set out by the Basic Income Sri Lanka. Inspired by the success of the 2nd wave, Raya Anika De Silva, a 17-year-old school-going child and who has just completed her O-levels, started her own basic income project. Coming from a family unit raised by her mother, she realized how important a basic income was for any single mother, how important it was to having a guaranteed source of income. It was a project by women for women. The donors were all women. Recipient, a single mother. One beneficiary will be supported by a cluster of 10 women, providing her a monthly basic income of 10,000 rupees for 2 years. She had persuaded the donors to award for 3 single mothers. That is, 3 women, 3 ladies were on board with Raya on this project. The award was unconditional and universal and maintaining ethnic harmony. The 30 donors came from different ethnic backgrounds, and the 3 recipients represented different ethnic groups as well. A Sinhalese woman from the south, 1 Tamil woman from the north, and 1 Muslim woman from the east. So for us, as far as we are concerned, we feel that we have actually reached our objective of raising awareness within the community by seeing Raya coming up with this project. Now, moving on, we have been under lockdowns for over past 1 year and 9 months. It has been lifted now, and we are hoping to take the project forward and continue to raise awareness on basic income. Thank you for giving me this time and to present our little story from Sri Lanka. I'm quite happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. We have one question. Do any exist a website or link to get more information about this project?
We have not done that as yet, but I think it's a good opportunity now to start it, because we are going to start our 4th phase, and it would be good if we can get our work on the website so that, you know, it is there for everyone to see. Thank you, Tobias.
So then I think no more questions. So we are a little bit fast, but that's not bad because people have more break now. That's fine. I would say thank you for all speakers. Thank you, Selvi, Patrick, Marcel, and thank you for the technical support. Jäger, thank you for that. And I would close the session, or anybody want to say something?
Yes, just to ask you, I mean, could we have a recording of this session?
Sure, yes. I think there will be on the website or on YouTube, but I can send you the link.
Yes, thank you so much, Tobias. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Tobias.
Thank you, Tobias, for moderating.
Thank you, Tobias, very much.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.